Hello, I'm Philip North. I'm the Bishop of Blackburn, serving the county of Lancashire. And we're here talking about a book called Held in God's Gaze, a book about the saints, written by two clergy from the Diocese of Blackburn, Bishop Duff and Father Heale. And we're going to think today about one of the saints talked about in that book, in a chapter started off by Bishop Jill, which Father Nicholas responds to, all about St. Patrick. So Bishop Jill, why St. Patrick? Why was this the right place to start?
Well, I've always been intrigued with the idea of the gospel being depicted as fire, and you see that very strongly in the stories about St. Patrick, but also we have his autobiography, his confession, written not long before he died, really. And confessions were a sense of what are the important themes in his life. And I found it on the internet, read it, and was really intrigued by it. And so that's why we started, we started there, really, as one of our original saints. And he brings such beautiful themes that come out in many of the British and other Irish saints.
What are those themes? Give us one or two of those themes that particularly capture your imagination.
Yeah, so, a number one would be humility. I mean, Patrick was 16 when he was kind of kidnapped by slave traders and taken to Ireland to be a shepherd. And he speaks very beautifully about that's where he learnt to be humble, and when he learnt to get up in the night and pray. And he said he was not tired or worn because the Spirit of God was burning in his heart. And I'm intrigued by that sense that the Spirit of God is burning in his heart. And then there's other stories that go on from him where he comes back, and when he escapes, but with a dream, literally like a dream in the Acts of the Apostles, where he's told left, right, gets onto a ship and escapes. But I think probably about a 40-year-old man, he senses a call back to Ireland, and so comes back as a missionary bishop, and he's determined to go and meet the son of the king who captured him, 9 of the 9 hostages. And when he goes to see him, he discovers that this king has lit a fire to the sun god, and there should be no other flame lit in the whole of Ireland for the duration of the feast. And Patrick lights a torch in defiance and says, this flame will continue to burn. And I love that sense of that defiance he acts in. And we see that image of we can go on a bit in a moment, but the flame, the torch, carrying the gospel across the British Isles in generations that followed.
Yes, that image of the flame, the beacon, has been such an important one for you, hasn't it? In terms of your own ministry today.
It has. The book, Lighting the Beacons, that I wrote previously, came out of just a repeated image, not a sort of full, fat vision or dream, but just repeated sense of people being like little lights coming on around the country, wherever. Almost people coming alive with Jesus, with the Spirit of God in their hearts.
And having the defiance to light the flame.
And being in defiance. Yes. Absolutely.
I never quite realised the connection between St. Patrick and one of my favourite saints, St. Martin of Tours. But there's something you pointed out in the book, isn't it, Nicholas? And I think Martin has had quite an influence on your life and your...
Martin is somebody who's had a very, very profound influence on me personally. I remember being in Tours at the site of his tomb and having a very, very strange sense of being drawn to come close to the place where his body lies. And I couldn't really make much sense of it until a few weeks later. It was as if he came to me and inspired me to follow his example of adopting a life of poverty, so that I have put into practice, or sought to put into practice, at least to some extent, the kind of pattern of life that he was moved to adopt when he was converted, challenged very much by an encounter with a pauper at the gates of Amiens, where he gave of his rich clothing that the pauper should be sheltered.
Famously cut it in half
with
a sword, didn't he?
And then, having been a very successful soldier, adopting the monastic life, the life of prayer and of poverty. And I felt moved and inspired to adopt a degree of voluntary poverty relative to what I would otherwise have had. So that the pattern of life that I live is guided very, very much by the example of St. Martin specifically, but of these saints.
Because we think
Martin
widely.
influenced Patrick. Martin
Yeah.
And Martin was one of the ones who influenced all of the early saints.
Yes, I think Patrick was. There's evidence he went to Brittany, didn't he, and met. I think
Because Bishop Shelley, it's not just Patrick, is it? There's a series of these British
There's a
saints.
series, really.
4 in particular, aren't there? Tell us about those.
there are really over generations, really. So Columba was an Irish, sort of 100 years after Patrick, who. Well, the stories are not clear, but he certainly set up a monastery on Iona with 12 other disciples, and that's still a centre of faith to this day. And one of the disciples was Aidan.
Yes.
And he comes into the story because King Oswald from Northumbria, who'd been sheltering in Iona when he was a little boy, calls for a missionary to come to Northumbria and to bring the gospel to that point. And the first guy who goes is quite sort of, he thinks they're thick northerners or something. But Aidan says he says you need to treat people gently and kindly. Yes. And it seems that, again, it's that humility that enables Aidan's ministry to be successful. So he goes everywhere walking. Yes. You know, if he's given a horse, he gives
away
it
to the poor.
Yes, exactly. And also a bit like at Patrick, he acts in defiance. There's a beautiful story when Bamber Castle, which is where King Oswald's base was, is on fire. And Aidan prays for a change in the wind direction. And the fire, so rather than the fire consuming the castle, the fire goes out. And in the community, I mean, he seems to ransom slaves, disciple them on the road, and has an astonishing number of disciples through that. And one of them is Hilda, who's my 3 favourite saints are Aidan, Hilda, and Mary. I remember when I was a very new bishop, you leapt up to me and said, "Who are your favourite saints?" And I hadn't thought that was a question. So Aidan and Hilda, a bit like Aidan, carries that same spirit of humility. And between them they had, I mean, I always want to say that in that 7th century, in one generation, there's an incredible flowering of mission.
And Cuthbert as well as part of that.
Well, he's one of your favourites.
He is,
isn't
look,
he?
I'm wearing his cross. Yes.
Yeah.
I remember praying at the tomb of Cuthbert at Durham when I was about to be made a bishop and committing my episcopal ministry to his prayers and his inspiration. So the extraordinary people of prayer, of courage, this love of the poor, this holding together of a love for the poor with a desperate desire to proclaim the gospel. There's a roundedness to those lives, aren't there? And I think they just speak to us so clearly today.
Yeah, and an astonishing travel, really, that someone like Cuthbert, his influence, certainly in the North East, has continued over generations.
Yes. And so we're connecting all these saints up, really, I think, starting with Patrick and going on this journey around those other saints. What about the Desert Fathers and Mothers? Is there a connection between Patrick and them, would you say?
They were living a life which was inspired by the Desert Fathers and Mothers, who in the 3rd and 4th centuries had been escaping from persecution in the cities, especially in Alexandria in North Egypt, and who had withdrawn into the place of wilderness so that they could devote themselves in a place of refuge, devote themselves very much to the scrutiny of the gospel, to the praying of the Psalms and the worship of God, and to the nurture within themselves of virtue, and overcoming what they call the passions, which are the tendencies within us to be angry or proud or lustful or gluttonous or all of those manifestations of our base selves. And that school of prayer and of moral training in the desert is something which inspired all of these monks and nuns who came afterwards. I mean, you've mentioned Hilda, and I think it's really, really important to highlight the fact that there is a testimony of women saints among these men, even though the women's voices are sometimes harder to access. Some of the most inspiring of the desert Christians are the women, who are incredibly purposeful and robust and resilient people, very, very assertive. They're not easy walkovers at all, very, very, very strong in character and vibrancy, but committing themselves to the nurture of a moral life through which they find the emergence within them also of a spiritual life.
And Patrick's great hymn, Prayer, was the breastplate, wasn't it? What inspires you about that?
It's got the hugely evocative name that's given to it of the Deer's Cry, which just blows me away. But there's a prayer at the centre of the breastplate, which just speaks of Christ being in us and around us and above us and beside us, to the left, to the right, to the fore, behind, above, below, outside, within, as if the whole of our consciousness is clothed and filled and illuminated with Christness. Yeah. And that seems to me to be really the subject of the whole of the book, really. In microcosm, it's exemplified in that one prayer, that the presence and the friendship of Christ should be accessible and known to us immediately, but eternally.
Should we end by praying that prayer now?
That's a good idea. Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ behind me, Christ before me, Christ beside me, Christ to win me, Christ to comfort and restore me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ in quiet, Christ in danger, Christ in the hearts of all that love me, Christ in the mouth of friend and stranger.
Thank you.